This happened when I was a kid. I was 12 years old and attending a 2-week summer camp on the border of Michigan and Ohio. My parents thought it would be a great opportunity for me to make new friends and learn new skills. It was a way to not have to stay at home for the summer, and that was enough reason for me to take them up on the whole camping idea. I met my best friend Greg that summer, and remember it like it was yesterday. The first few days of camp were rough for me. I didn't know anyone, and I was struggling to adjust to the unfamiliar surroundings. But then on the 4th day, I met Greg. He was the same age as me, but he had a confidence and ease about him that I found intriguing. We quickly hit it off and spent the next 2 weeks inseparable. We went on hikes, swam in the lake, and participated in all sorts of camp activities together. As our time at camp came to an end, we realized we didn't want to say goodbye just yet. We still had the rest of summer to burn up. So we came up with a plan to visit each other's homes. Greg was from Ohio, and I was from Michigan, but we were determined to make it work. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. A few weeks later, my parents were thrilled when I told them about my new friend and how we wanted to spend time together. They invited Greg to come stay with us for a week in Michigan. I still remember the excitement I felt when I saw him step off the bus. His dad talked to my parents and they went to do adult stuff. By that time, I had basically kidnapped Greg and we left the grown-ups. We spent the week biking, fishing, and exploring the abandoned buildings in our town. My parents loved having Greg over and treated him like one of their own. At the end of the week, it was my turn to visit Greg in Ohio. His family was just as welcoming as mine had been, and we had a blast together. We went to the Ohio State Fair, played video games, and even went to a minor league baseball game. I just found out that I'm supposed to be going to my grandparents' farm in Fleming, Ohio. Greg spoke slowly. It's hours away from here, and this is the only time I'm able to go. I really want you to come with me. Greg had a hopeful look in his eyes. I could tell that this was a big deal for him, and I didn't want to disappoint him. Plus, the idea of a road trip with my best friend sounded like the adventure of a lifetime. Without hesitation, I agreed to join him on his journey. We packed our bags, said goodbye to our families, and hit the road. As we drove through the countryside, Greg told me stories about his grandparents and how much he loved visiting their farm. He talked about the fields, the animals, and the freedom he felt when he was there. I could see the excitement on his face, and I was happy to be a part of this experience with him. After several hours of driving, we finally arrived at the farm. It was everything Greg had described and more. There were acres of farmland, barns, and animals roaming around freely. I could tell how much this place meant to him. Over the next few days, Greg and I explored the farm and helped out with various chores. We fed the chickens, milked the cows, and even went horseback riding. It was an unforgettable experience that I'll always cherish. During our stay on Greg's grandparents' farm, we had many more adventures. One of the most memorable ones was the day we went for a tractor ride with Greg's grandpa, a red-faced barrel of a man with big, powerful arms. As we bumped along the dirt roads, enjoying the countryside view, Greg and I noticed a large field that seemed to be fenced off from the rest of the farm. "Hey, Grandpa, what's that field over there?" Greg asked, pointing to the fenced-off area. "That's a field we're going to have to burn down this weekend," Grandpa replied, looking at the field with a solemn expression. "Why is it being destroyed?" I asked, being nosy. Grandpa hesitated for a moment before responding. "Well, unfortunately, the field has been infested with pests. We've tried everything we could to save it, but it's beyond repair. It's just not safe to keep it around anymore." Greg and I exchanged glances. We both knew what the other was thinking. We wanted to explore that field before it was destroyed. "Grandpa, do you think it would be okay if we went to explore it for a little while before it's destroyed?" Greg asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. Grandpa hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "All right, but be careful, boys. An hour or so, no more than that. Come right back here." After dinner, Greg and I couldn't wait to go back to the field to run around and play. The temperature had dropped, and it was much more pleasant outside now. As we entered the field, we immediately noticed that it was much cooler only just a few feet away on the other side of the farm. It was also eerily quiet. There were no bugs buzzing around, and no birds flying overhead. It was as if we had entered a completely different world. We started running around, chasing each other and laughing, enjoying our last moments in the field. But as we wandered farther into the field, we heard additional movement. At first, we thought it was just each other making noise, but then we saw shadows of figures behind us. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Greg, my heart racing. "Yeah, what was that?" Greg replied, also whispering. As we turned around to investigate, we saw a group of figures slowly approaching us. They were silhouettes against the darkening sky, and we couldn't make out any details about them. I looked at the sky. There was a dark line where the sun should have been. The temperature felt like it had dropped by 10 degrees. "Who are they?" I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "We should go," Greg replied, his voice shaking. We started running back towards the farmhouse, but the figures seemed to be getting closer and closer. It was like they were chasing us. As we got closer to the farmhouse, we could hear the sound of Grandpa's voice calling out to us. As he called, we ran towards where I had assumed the direction of his voice was. Greg called to me to run with him. I distinctly heard Grandpa's voice in another direction. When we stopped to catch our breath, we were deeper in the cornfield and were totally turned around. Greg's Grandpa's voice stopped, and we didn't hear anything. No truck engines, no large machines, no animals, nothing. We walked for what felt like hours. As we reached the center of the field, we stumbled upon an open area where the corn stalks were flattened, forming a pattern on the ground. It was interesting and creepy at the same time. The stalks looked like they were leaning on the ground. When I stooped to take a closer look, I saw that none of them were broken, just bent at an incredible angle. We searched the area and discovered that part of the field had a large semicircular shape with intricate patterns made out of the stalks of corn. Suddenly, we heard rustling coming from across the field. We turned to see a shadowy figure looming behind the tall corn stalks. It was so tall that it towered over the plants, and its eyes blazed with an eerie light. It raised his hand and showed rows of sharp white teeth. As the shadowy figure pointed in our direction, we realized that it had spotted us. We looked to our left and right and saw additional shadow figures also looking our way. The realization that we were being watched by something not of this world filled us with dread. The figures seemed to step out from between the stalks and just appear from nowhere. As we were running through the field, we heard growling and shuffling sounds coming from behind us. It was clear that the shadowy figures were chasing us, and we were running out of breath. My legs were like rubber, and I felt like stopping and crying. I looked back and saw Greg stumbling behind me, with one of the shadowy figures grabbing onto his shirt and yanked him backwards. I panicked and reached out to grab Greg's hand, pulling him with all my might. As luck would have it, I pulled us clear of the field and we tumbled on the ground. I saw the figure just a few feet away. It was glaring at us from between the corn stalks. I thought it was going to jump out and grab us, but it looked up and stepped backwards into the field, disappearing. Greg looked up and saw his grandpa holding a shotgun. "You boys, come around me and get on in the house," Grandpa said. I had enough energy to roll around and get on the other side of Greg's grandpa. Greg was right behind me. I heard him say, "Light it up." There was a loud boom and a swoosh. Grandpa had gone back closer to the house, and we watched, from the safety of the porch, the portion of farm land that was set on fire. After a few minutes, there were small fire trucks parked around the area that was burning. They didn't try to put out the fire, but we all watched as it burned that evening and partially through the night. In the morning, Greg and I got up early and went to the porch to see what happened. Greg had the idea of going to the barn and looking out from the top. We climbed a few rafters and got to the cupola to look out from the highest area we could. We saw what I could best describe as an incomplete crop circle that appeared untouched by the flames. The pattern was clearly visible, with no signs of damage or scorching. There were men walking around with guns and dogs, but there were no signs of the shadow creatures. I have not been back to Ohio since.